My boss said that I have to come to his home twice a week to discuss special work matters if I want him to make sure my visa isn't taken away. I didn't realize the plane had landed until the wheels slammed against the runway hard enough to jolt my teeth. For a few seconds, I thought the shaking belonged to me. My nerves, my uncertainty, my quietly panicking heartbeat. But no, it was real. We had touched American soil. New York. The city that devours the unprepared and crowns the relentless. I had no idea which category I would fall into. All I knew was that going back wasn't an option. When I stepped out of JFK, the air hit me like a full-body slap. It smelled like jet fuel, street food, perfume, and ambition all fighting for dominance. Cars honked as if arguing with God. People moved with urgent purpose, and towering buildings glinted under the afternoon sun like they were judging me. I clutched my passport tighter, pretending I belonged among them, these confident strangers who didn't look back. My work visa was stamped only 2 weeks ago. I'd reread the approval email so many times during the flight that I could quote it like scripture. "We are pleased to offer." Those words were the thin rope pulling my family and me out of the life we'd been trapped in for too long. This job mattered. Failure was not allowed. The taxi ride to Manhattan felt like sitting inside a pinball machine. The driver yelled at someone every 30 seconds, switching between languages I didn't understand and insults I unfortunately did. I glued my eyes to the skyline, steel, glass, impossible height. It felt unreal, like I'd stepped into a movie set. My grandmother once said that cities have souls. If so, New York's soul was huge, loud, and slightly drunk. The office building waited for me like a silent challenge. 50 stories of gray authority rising over the street. Caldwell and Pierce Marketing. My new employer. My lifeline. Inside, the elevators were colder than outside winter, humming like something alive. I checked my reflection. Tired eyes, hair flattened by hours of travel, a smile that looked stitched on. "You can do this," I told myself, even though my voice sounded like a borrowed one. The HR rep who greeted me, Marissa, had coffee breath and a smile polished to corporate perfection. "You must be Alina. Welcome. Let's get you settled." She talked fast, her sentences bouncing off the walls as she guided me through hallways bright enough to make my vision ache. My new team sat in an open workspace filled with plants that looked suspiciously plastic. There were motivational quotes framed on the walls. Think boldly, own your narrative, drive results. I wondered if anyone ever read them voluntarily. A tall guy with tousled dark hair approached first, holding a coffee mug that said, "Data never lies." "Hey, you're the new strategist? I'm Ethan," he said, shaking my hand with warm confidence. "Don't worry, the first day is always sensory overload. It gets better, eventually." Others followed. Julia, who loved analytics more than human interaction. Ben, who joked too loudly but seemed kind. And Mira, who whispered everything as if the walls were listening. They were friendly in that American way, open but not too open. Curious but not invasive. I liked them immediately. When Mr. Caldwell finally appeared, he carried the room's attention like it belonged to him. Mid-50s, silver at the temples, expensive suit that practically purred wealth. His handshake was firm, his smile calculated. "So you're the new talent we fought so hard to recruit," he said, eyes scanning me a second too long. "We're expecting great things from you, Alina." Something in his tone made me straighten, not out of pride but caution. Still, I thanked him politely, trying to swallow the sudden unease. It was probably nothing. Jet lag playing with my instincts. I pushed the thought aside, The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of onboarding documents, software tutorials, and meetings I barely understood. But beneath the exhaustion, there was a spark of excitement. Real, burning excitement. I was here. I had made it into a company people in my country whispered about with envy. Back home, my family would be waiting for my message, celebrating even before reading it fully. When I finally stepped outside that evening, the sky was dark, yet the city shone brighter than daylight. Neon signs blinked like impatient eyes. Music seeped from every corner. Strangers brushed past me, wrapped in their own stories, their own battles. Somewhere among them, I was now another thread in the chaos. I walked down the sidewalk slowly, letting the noise settle into my bones. I felt small, yes, but also strangely powerful. If I could survive this first overwhelming day, maybe I could survive the rest. Maybe I could build something here. My suitcase wheels rattled behind me as I made my way toward the temporary apartment the company arranged. I felt the city's energy vibrating through the pavement, pushing me forward. I didn't know it then, but this city would test me in ways I never expected, would corner me, challenge me, force me to choose who I wanted to become. But on that first night, all I felt was this. New York didn't welcome me gently. It dared me to stay, and I intended to. If my first day in New York felt like controlled chaos, my first month at the company felt like throwing myself into a running engine and hoping not to get shredded. The probation period was supposed to help new hires integrate smoothly, according to the glossy handbook. In reality, it was an unspoken competition where everyone pretended they weren't competing. I learned quickly that the office had its own pulse. Lights came on at 7, but real work started much earlier. People arrived with half-finished coffees and all-finished exhaustion. I adapted fast. I had to. Every morning, I woke before the alarm, my body still confused by the time zone, my mind already rehearsing what waited for me. Deadlines, presentations, endless emails. It didn't scare me. It fueled me. I wasn't the smartest in the room, but I could outwork anyone, and I did. Soon, I became the person who stayed last. The cleaning staff learned my name. Ethan would joke, "Alina, you're making the rest of us look bad." But beneath the humor there was respect. I could feel it, and that meant something. I wasn't just surviving. I was proving that I deserved to be there. Caldwell noticed, too. More than I expected, more than I wanted. At first, it was harmless. A casual, good job after a meeting. A nod of approval when I shared a creative idea. Every boss did that. But then his attention sharpened, shifted. Compliments became heavier. One evening, after most of the team had gone home, I stayed behind to finish a pitch deck. My screen glowed in the dim office, and I was so focused I didn't hear him approach until he spoke behind me. "Still here, Alina?" Impressive dedication. I turned, startled. He stood too close, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on me in a way that made my skin tense. A normal boss would have commented on the project. A normal boss would have kept distance. Caldwell did neither. "I like your work ethic," he said softly. "It's rare to find someone so eager to satisfy expectations." Something in his tone made the back of my neck prickle. Satisfaction was not the word he needed, and yet he lingered, as if waiting for a reaction. I forced a polite smile. "I'm just trying to do my job well." "And you are?" he said, smiling with the confidence of a man used to receiving whatever he wanted. "You're becoming one of our brightest." He left shortly after, but the discomfort stayed behind like a shadow that refused to detach from me. After that evening, the pattern grew. During meetings, I caught him watching me when I wasn't speaking. His gaze didn't wander. It targeted. Direct, assessing, inappropriate in a way that was subtle enough to deny, but strong enough to feel. He started addressing me by my first name more tenderly than necessary. Alina, let's discuss that idea of yours later. Alina, you've exceeded expectations again. Alina, I see real potential in you. He didn't speak that way to anyone else. At lunch one afternoon, Julia leaned closer and whispered, "Caldwell really likes you." The tone wasn't playful. It was cautious. I laughed it off, though the sound came out thin. "I think he's just impressed with my work." "Maybe," she replied, stirring her salad without looking at me. "But just be aware. He has a reputation for being too friendly with new hires." My fork froze in midair. "Friendly how?" She hesitated, eyes flickering around as if worried the walls could snitch. "He picks favorites, especially women. And he's persistent. If he likes someone, he doesn't hide it." A cold knot formed in my stomach. I wanted to ask more, but she pushed the conversation to safer topics, leaving me with a warning disguised as gossip. The weeks passed, and Caldwell's friendliness increased. He appeared beside my desk unexpectedly. He commented on my clothes, softly, always with the tone of an innocent remark, but with eyes that suggested otherwise. He praised me in front of the team, yet his gaze made the compliments feel like something else entirely. Once, after I finished presenting a campaign concept, he leaned in while everyone clapped. His hand brushed the small of my back, too lightly to accuse, too deliberately to ignore. "You have instincts," he murmured. "Rare instincts." I stepped away quickly, pretending I needed water. That night, walking home through the noisy streets, I kept replaying his touch. I hated how vividly I felt it even hours later. I wasn't naive. Men like Caldwell didn't make casual gestures. They calculated everything, and for the first time since arriving in New York, fear threaded itself into my excitement. Still, I forced myself to stay focused. My visa depended on this job. My family depended on me. My mother sent voice messages every evening wishing me strength, and I never told her about Caldwell. What would I say? That my future here might hinge on something I didn't want to give? No. I refused to let panic control me, but I also couldn't deny the truth forming slowly in my mind. His interest wasn't harmless, and it wasn't going away. By the end of my probation period, the unspoken tension had grown so thick I felt it every time I walked into the office. Caldwell watched me with expectation, like he was waiting for the right moment to reveal something he'd already decided. And deep down, I sensed that moment was coming. Soon. The morning Caldwell called me into his office, I sensed something wrong before he even spoke. There are moments when the air changes, when it thickens, when it hums with a warning you can't explain. That was exactly how it felt when Marissa appeared beside my desk and said, too cheerfully, "Alina, Mr. Caldwell would like to see you." Her smile was polite, but her eyes avoided mine. That alone was enough to make my palms sweat. I walked down the hallway toward his office, each step slower than the last. The glass door was half closed, the blinds drawn in a way they never were. He usually kept everything open to show confidence, transparency, control. But today, he wanted privacy. "Come in," he said the moment I knocked, as if he'd been standing by the door waiting. His office smelled like expensive cologne and something sharper underneath. Ambition, maybe. He gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. "Sit, Alina. We have something important to discuss." I sat without answering. My heartbeat thumped in my ears like a warning drum. He closed the door fully and returned to his chair with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who wanted to watch every reaction. "First of all," he began, smiling as though delivering good news, "your probation period is over. Congratulations. You've exceeded our expectations." Relief flickered through me, but it was weak, fragile, like a flame in a storm. Something in his tone made the relief feel premature. "Thank you," I said carefully. "I'm really grateful for the opportunity." "Yes, I imagine you are." He leaned back, fingers steepled. "I reviewed your performance personally. You're one of the few employees who genuinely deserve a long-term place here." I nodded, unsure where this was going. "You're here on a work visa, correct?" That question hit harder than it should have. "Yes," I answered slowly. "Why?" He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied me with a kind of amused curiosity. It made my skin crawl. "As you know," he continued, "visa renewals depend heavily on employer sponsorship. It's a delicate process, complicated, many moving parts, and frankly, companies don't always invest in people who don't commit fully." My breath caught. Not visibly, I hoped, but enough for me to feel it. "I am committed," I said. "My work shows that." "Oh, it does," he agreed with a smirk. "But dedication is measured in more than spreadsheets and late nights. Trust is also part of it. Accessibility, flexibility." The way he spoke the last word made my stomach twist. I felt the ground shift beneath me, felt the skin-prickling realization that this conversation wasn't about performance, wasn't about work, wasn't about anything professional at all. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "You're talented, Alina, and I want you to stay here. I want to help you. But..." He paused, letting the silence stretch until it felt suffocating. "You need to help me too." My fingers tightened around the armrests. "In what way?" My voice barely resembled my own. He smiled. A slow, patient, predatory smile. "In a way that keeps things simple for both of us. You'll come to my home twice a week. After hours, we'll handle work matters privately, without distractions." Heat flashed up my spine, followed by cold. The phrase "work matters" hung in the air like smoke. He didn't need to say more. The implication was loud enough to drown out the city outside his window. My heartbeat turned violent. "Mr. Caldwell, I don't understand." "You do." His voice sharpened instantly. The softness vanished, revealing steel underneath. "Don't pretend you don't." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. He stood up and walked around the desk slowly, like a man approaching something he already owned. I forced myself to look calm, to maintain a professional mask, even as adrenaline surged through me. He stopped beside my chair, too close. "If you want your visa renewed, and I assume you do, you'll cooperate. Many employees understand the value of strategic arrangements." I kept my gaze fixed forward, afraid that if I met his eyes, he would see fear. He would swallow it whole. "I expect you to give me your answer soon," he added, voice dropping lower. "But I think we both know what the sensible choice is." I stood abruptly, almost knocking the chair back. "Is that all?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "For now," he said lightly, as if he hadn't just tried to coerce me. "Take the rest of the morning to think. We'll speak again." My hand trembled on the doorknob, but I didn't let him see it. I didn't look back. I stepped into the hallway with legs that barely obeyed me and walked straight into the restroom before my composure broke. Inside, I clutched the sink and stared at my reflection. My face was pale, eyes wide, breath unsteady. My fingertips tingled from adrenaline. I felt violated without a single touch, exposed, cornered. His plan was clear. Use my visa as a leash. Use his power as a weapon. Use me. No. 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 I turned on the water and let it run over my hands until they stopped shaking. I could not panic. Not yet. Panic was dangerous. Panic would expose me. I needed to be calm, strategic, invisible. I left the restroom with a face almost expressionless and returned to my desk. The world around me continued as if nothing had happened. Colleagues typing, phones ringing, laughter from the break room. Nobody saw the storm that had just cracked open inside me. But as I sat down, one truth anchored itself in my mind. Caldwell had made a move, and I would have to make one too. For 3 days after that meeting, I walked through the office like a ghost dressed in business casual. I answered emails, attended meetings, delivered reports, everything exactly as expected. On the surface, I was the same hard-working employee. But inside, something hard and cold had settled where my fear used to be. The first night after his ultimatum, I barely slept. I kept replaying his words, that poisonous smile, the certainty in his voice. You'll cooperate. He said it like a man commenting on the weather, certain the sun would rise exactly when he wanted it to. The second night, the anger came. Sharp, hot, liberating. I paced the apartment until dawn. It wasn't just about me. It was about every woman who had walked into his office before me. How many had he cornered? How many had he used? And how many had left quietly because they didn't have a visa to protect or couldn't risk the battle? By the third night, anger had transformed into something else. Resolve. If Caldwell thought my visa made me weak, he didn't understand me at all. That morning, I arrived at work even earlier than usual. The office was still half dark, the city outside slowly waking. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, not to work, but to research. I typed slowly at first, afraid the entire internet could hear my heartbeat. Workplace coercion law NYC. Employer leveraging visa unlawful. Sexual misconduct power imbalance lawsuit examples. Pages and pages of information appeared. My hands started trembling, not from fear this time, but from the realization that what Caldwell did wasn't just immoral, it was illegal. Very illegal. The laws were clearer than I expected. A boss threatening your job or visa in exchange for sexual access was a form of coercion, sexual harassment, abuse of authority. Pick any term, all pointed to the same truth. I had rights, and he had crossed them. The more I read, the more a plan began to form, not fully shaped yet, but alive. Around noon, 2 co-workers were whispering near the printer. Normally I wouldn't pay attention, but the words Caldwell and last year slipped out, pulling my focus. I didn't interrupt. I simply walked past slowly. Their voices dropped, but they glanced at me, quickly, nervously. It was enough. There were stories, rumors, something people knew but never said out loud. Later that afternoon, I found myself in the break room with Mira. She always spoke softly, but today she seemed unusually tense. When the room emptied, she leaned closer. "Be careful around Caldwell," she whispered. "If he's showing interest, don't trust him." My pulse skipped. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked quietly. She hesitated, then sighed. "Because it happened before. Not exactly the same, but close. A woman from Creative left suddenly 2 years ago. No one said why, but everyone knew." She looked at the floor as if afraid the tiles might repeat her words. "The company covered it up." A chill slid down my spine. This wasn't just one incident, this was a pattern. Why didn't anyone do anything? I asked. Her lips pressed into a thin, hopeless line. He's powerful, and he knows how to protect himself. I nodded slowly, understanding more with every second. But I wasn't that woman from Creative, and I wasn't going to disappear quietly. That evening, I began gathering information. Nothing risky yet, nothing noticeable. I stored important links, downloaded articles, read case studies. I learned how evidence had to be collected. Legally, discreetly, carefully. Secret recordings were allowed in New York as long as one party knew about them, which meant me. Screenshots, call logs, messages, any written request or implication, all of it could matter. Most importantly, I learned that timing was everything. One wrong move could alert him. One sloppy action could cost me the case before it even began. When I left the building that night, the city felt different. Not menacing, not overwhelming. More like a battleground I was finally learning the map of. The air was crisp, biting, full of city noise. But beneath it all, I sensed something shifting inside me. On the subway ride home, I stared at my reflection in the window. I didn't see fear anymore. I saw exhaustion, yes, but also something sharp behind my eyes. Determination, maybe even defiance. Back in the apartment, I called my mother. She chatted happily about the neighbors, about a new cousin being born, about local gossip. I kept my voice steady, never revealing that my life was slowly tilting into a dangerous direction. She didn't need to carry that burden. It was mine. After the call, I sat on the bed and breathed deeply. Caldwell expected me to fold, to show up at his home like an obedient employee too scared to resist. He underestimated me. I wasn't going to his house. I wasn't giving him anything. I wasn't letting him own my future. I was going to fight. Quietly at first. Smartly. Patiently. He thought my visa was a chain. But he'd just handed me the lockpick. The first time I recorded a conversation with Caldwell, my hand shook so badly I nearly dropped my phone. I hid it inside my blazer pocket, screen facing inward, voice recorder running. It felt criminal, dangerous, wrong, even though every article I'd read reassured me it was legal. New York was a one-party consent state. As long as I knew the recording was happening, it was admissible. Still, my heartbeat hammered like I was about to rob a bank. Caldwell didn't even look up when I entered his office. "You wanted to see me?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Yes," he said, flipping through documents with practiced boredom. "I'm still waiting for your answer." My pulse sprinted. His tone, calm, patient, entitled, made my skin crawl. "I need more time," I answered. His eyes finally lifted, sharp, irritated. "You've had time. I need to know whether you're willing to make things mutually beneficial." The recorder in my pocket captured every syllable. I forced myself to breathe evenly, to nod as if considering, while inside I felt a twisted sense of victory. I had proof, real, solid proof. Not enough to take down a man like him, but the start of something. After that meeting, gathering evidence became a silent routine, woven into my days like a second job. Whenever Caldwell texted me, even vague messages like, "We should speak privately later," I screenshotted them, saved them twice, then forwarded them to a secure cloud folder under a fake name. When he left handwritten notes on files, little comments like, "Come by my office tonight alone," I photographed them carefully, making sure the date and his handwriting were visible. I kept everything. Every unusual look, every comment that crossed a line, every shift in his tone. During calls, I recorded audio under the pretense of taking notes. He never questioned it. Men like Caldwell didn't imagine they could be outsmarted. They believed they existed above consequences. Meanwhile, he grew bolder. One afternoon, after reviewing a campaign proposal together, he leaned closer than necessary, his hand grazing my shoulder lightly, too lightly to slap away without causing a scene. "You're talented, Alina," he whispered. "But talent only gets a person so far. The rest comes down to cooperation." I stepped away, pretending to pick up a pen. My voice recorder caught everything. Later that week, he passed by my desk, pausing just long enough to murmur, "We need to schedule the nights you'll be coming over." Nights. Plural. As if I had already agreed. I recorded that too. But gathering evidence wasn't just about him. I needed context, patterns, witnesses, whispers, anything that could show this wasn't an isolated incident. So I listened. I lingered near conversations without seeming to. I paid attention to the way some women tensed when Caldwell walked by, how others avoided him entirely. I noticed how junior female employees tended to leave after a year or two, rarely longer. I watched new interns grow nervous after one-on-one meetings, whispering among themselves. It wasn't proof, but it painted a picture, a disturbing one. One evening, while sorting files in the storage room, I overheard two employees speaking near the door. "Did you see the way he looked at her?" one said. "Classic Caldwell." "It's always the new ones," the other muttered. "They last until they say no." I froze, listening so hard my breath halted. But the moment I stepped closer, they left quickly, as if afraid to be heard. That same week, Mira found me in the kitchen making tea. "Has he said anything else to you?" she whispered. I hesitated. I couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. The fewer people who knew I was preparing a case, the safer I was. "He's persistent," I admitted. She sighed. "He always is." Her expression held pity mixed with resignation, as if she'd seen this story unfold too many times. It only strengthened my resolve. I wouldn't be another silent chapter in Caldwell's history. At night, my apartment became a war room. I sat on the floor surrounded by printed notes, folders, my laptop open to legal guides. I labeled each piece of evidence with a date, time, and context. I wrote summaries to accompany the recordings. I backed everything up on multiple drives, hiding them in different places. Fear didn't disappear. It simply changed shape. It became preparation, strategy, armor. A strange sense of duality settled into my daily routine. By day, I worked harder than ever, my campaigns sharp, my reports flawless, my smile professional. To Caldwell, I looked compliant, hesitant, maybe even intimidated. Let him think that. Let him believe I was bending. By night, I turned into someone else, someone methodical, calculating, willing to do whatever it took to protect herself. Then, a moment came that sealed my resolve fully. Late one Monday evening, when most of the office had emptied, Caldwell approached my desk. He leaned down, his breath too close to my ear. "I expect you to make your decision soon. You wouldn't want to jeopardize your future here." He walked away before I could reply. I waited until he disappeared, then pressed stop on my phone's recorder. I replayed it in the elevator ride down, his voice echoing through the tiny metal box. It sounded worse in playback, more manipulative, unmistakably threatening. That recording became the anchor of my courage. He was tightening the noose, but he didn't know I was already cutting the rope. Quietly, legally, ruthlessly. Evidence was power, and I was accumulating enough to bury him, piece by piece, word by word, until he had nowhere left to hide. By the time Caldwell summoned me again, I felt like I'd been living two lives for weeks. One where I smiled politely in hallways, and another where I cataloged every breath he took near me. The tension had become a living thing, something sharp and restless that followed me through the office like a shadow. I knew this moment was coming. I'd felt it tightening around me day by day. But when Marissa appeared beside my desk, her expression unusually stiff, it still sent a pulse of cold through my chest. "Alina," she said quietly, "Mr. Caldwell would like to see you. Now!" Her eyes flicked upward. Hesitation, worry, something unspoken. This wasn't a normal meeting. I stood and walked across the office, aware of how silent the world felt, as if even the tapping keyboards held their breath. Caldwell's door was closed again, blinds pulled down. He wanted another private conversation, another attempt to corner me. I stepped inside. He didn't offer a seat this time. He leaned against his desk, arms crossed, jaw tight enough to crack. "You've been avoiding me," he said without preamble. My heart beat faster, but I kept my face neutral. "I've been busy with deadlines." He laughed softly, the sound dripping with disbelief. "Don't insult my intelligence. I've given you time, too much time, and you still haven't answered my proposal." Proposal. As if what he demanded belonged in a contract instead of a criminal report. I lifted my chin slightly. "I told you I needed space to think." "And I," he said, stepping closer, "am out of patience." His presence loomed, thickening the air between us. My pulse thudded, but I didn't step back. I couldn't. That would give him too much triumph. His voice dropped. "You're making this unnecessarily difficult. You know what the situation is." He circled slowly behind his desk, each step deliberate. "Your visa expires in less than a year. Renewal requires our sponsorship. My sponsorship." I felt the words like a blow, even though I'd heard the threat before. He said it with more force now, with open confidence. "If you refuse to cooperate," he continued, "the company may reconsider your contract. That's a reality you should take seriously." My nails dug into my palms. My phone recorded everything from my pocket. He had no idea he was building the very case that would destroy him. "You're threatening my job?" I asked, forcing calm into my tone. "I'm giving you clarity," he said smoothly. "If you won't meet me halfway, I can't support your future here. It's simple business." It wasn't business. It was blackmail wrapped in a silk tie. He leaned forward, hands on the desk. His eyes sharpened with something uglier than desire. Entitlement. "All you need to do is show up when I ask. 2 evenings a week, at my home. No one has to know. And you will keep your position, your visa, your life here." My stomach twisted violently. He said it as if he were offering a gift. When I didn't respond, his voice hardened. "You think the company will replace me with you? You think anyone will believe you over me?" A cruel smile curved on his lips. "I've been here 26 years. You've been here 4 months. There it was. His mistake. Arrogance woven so deeply into his bones he couldn't imagine being wrong. I forced my expression into something between confusion and concern. "I'm trying to understand what you're asking," I said softly. He exhaled, satisfied by what he thought was submission. "Good. Then listen carefully. This is your final chance. If you can't give me your answer by the end of the week, I'll assume you're not committed to continuing with us, and HR will be informed." He straightened his tie calmly, as if he'd just negotiated a routine contract. The conversation was over for him. In his mind, victory was only a matter of time. I left the office with perfect posture, my expression unreadable. But the moment I turned down the hallway, my legs almost gave out. I gripped the wall briefly before continuing toward the restroom. Inside, I locked the door and pressed my forehead to the cool mirror. Rage buzzed under my skin like electricity. Fear curled in my veins. But beneath both was something stronger: certainty. I replayed the recording as I stood in the bathroom stall. Every vile implication, every threat, every line delivered with condescending confidence, it was all there. Solid evidence. Enough to crack open the carefully polished facade he hid behind. Outside the bathroom, the office hummed on, unaware of the storm that had just shifted. Back at my desk, I pretended to type an email. My hands were steady again. Caldwell thought this was the end of my resistance. He thought he'd cornered me so completely that I would finally break. But he had no idea what I'd gathered. No idea how close he was to losing everything. No idea that his threats weren't scaring me anymore. They were empowering me. He believed he was tightening control. But what he didn't realize was that every word he spoke was another nail in the coffin I was preparing for his career. By the end of the week, he wanted an answer, and he would get one. Just not the one he expected. By Thursday morning, the decision was no longer a question. It was a deadline counting down inside my chest. Caldwell expected my answer by the end of the week. He had walked past my desk twice that morning already, each time with the smug confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His silence was the final push meant to break me. Instead, it solidified me. I had everything I needed: recordings, screenshots, notes, timestamps, patterns, his words preserved with a clarity he could never deny. I'd replayed them so many times at night that I knew them by heart. If you refuse to cooperate, your visa depends on my support. 2 evenings a week. His threats had become the soundtrack of my insomnia, but they were also my weapon. By noon, I had rehearsed what I would say at least 100 times. It didn't matter. When the moment came, I still felt like my lungs had forgotten how to work. My hands were cold, my fingertips numb. But I stood anyway. I walked to HR with a folder tucked against my chest, my heart pounding not with fear, but with the certainty that I was doing the right thing. Even if it ruined my career. Even if it ruined everything. When I reached the HR floor, the glass walls and spotless floors made the room feel too bright, too exposed. Marissa sat behind her desk, typing something with the rapid efficiency of someone who'd been doing the same job for years. She looked up when I approached. "Alina, is everything okay?" I swallowed hard. "I need to talk to someone," I said. "Privately. It's urgent." Her expression shifted immediately, concern replacing cordiality. She stood and led me to a small conference room. Inside, she closed the door gently, then sat across from me. "You're shaking," she said softly. "What's going on?" I took a breath that scraped like sand in my throat. Then I placed the folder on the table. "It's about Mr. Caldwell." Her eyes widened, just slightly, but enough. She didn't ask the usual questions employees got when complaining about a superior. She didn't ask if it was a misunderstanding. She simply said, "Tell me." And I did. Not all at once. The words came slowly, carefully, like stepping stones across a river. The first recording, the threats, the pressure, the proposition, the escalating intimidation. Marissa's face paled. She listened without interrupting, her fingers pressed against her lips. When I finished, I pushed the folder toward her and opened it. "This is the evidence," I said quietly. "There's more stored digitally, with timestamps." She didn't touch it at first. She stared at it as if it were something radioactive. Then she reached out and slid the papers toward her, reviewing them slowly, eyes narrowing, widening, freezing. She played a recording. Caldwell's voice filled the room, calm, measured, unmistakably coercive. When it ended, she looked at me, horror in her expression. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Alina, this is serious." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm here." She exhaled shakily, then straightened in her seat, switching into professional mode. "I believe you," she said immediately, "and we will act on this. But you need to understand, Caldwell is senior management. An investigation will be complicated. There will be interviews, documentation, a review board, and it won't be quiet." "I don't want quiet," I said. "I want him to stop. Not just with me, with anyone." Her gaze softened. "You're brave for doing this." I didn't feel brave. I felt exhausted. Marissa stood and opened the door. "Wait here. I need to bring in another HR representative. This can't be handled alone." She left, and the silence that filled the room was thick and oppressive. I sat there staring at the table, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles had gone white. I expected fear to crush me, but it didn't. Instead, there was a strange clarity, as if my mind had finally stopped fighting itself. A few minutes later, Marissa returned with another HR manager, an older woman named Linda, whose face was tight with concern. She introduced herself quickly, then sat down. "I've been briefed," she said. "We're going to review everything carefully. You did the right thing coming forward." They both went through the materials again, this time even more thoroughly. When they finished, Linda closed the folder with deliberate care. "A formal internal investigation will begin immediately," she said. "We cannot promise the process will be fast, but we can promise that your complaint will be taken seriously. You won't be retaliated against. That is our obligation by law." I nodded, though a part of me knew Caldwell would not take this silently, no matter what HR said. "We'll contact you soon with next steps," Linda continued. "For now, go back to work as normally as you can. Act as if nothing has changed." Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. I left the HR office with my pulse still racing, but my spine straighter than it had been in weeks. As I walked through the hallway, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. The risk, the uncertainty, the unknown consequences waiting ahead. But I also felt something else. Relief. Real, tangible relief. I had spoken up. I had chosen to fight. When I returned to my floor, coworkers glanced at me, unaware of the grenade I'd just handed to HR. The office hummed with normal chatter, completely oblivious. And then, as if fate wanted to test my nerve immediately, Caldwell stepped out of his office. Our eyes met across the room. His expression was calm. Mine was unreadable. He didn't know yet, but soon he would. And when he did, his world would never look the same. The morning HR informed me they were launching a formal investigation. Something inside me finally exhaled. Not relief, at least not fully, but something close. A loosening. A release of the tension that had been wrapped around my ribs for weeks. But the peace lasted only until I received their final message of the day. "We advise you to seek legal counsel immediately." The words echoed louder than any warning I'd heard so far. I left the office early, claiming a headache, though in reality my mind was sharp. Too sharp. Every thought became a calculation. Every possibility branched into a dozen futures. If I won, my life changed. If I lost, everything vanished. My job, my visa, my home, my chance to help my family. I wasn't just fighting a man. I was fighting an entire system built to protect men like him. I walked through Manhattan with my phone pressed against my ear, calling every immigration employment attorney I could find. Most didn't pick up. One receptionist put me on hold for 20 minutes before disconnecting accidentally. By the fourth call, I expected another dead end. Instead, a calm voice answered. "Law Office of Daniel Kovac. How can I help you?" My entire body tensed. I need to speak with an attorney. It's urgent. It's about workplace coercion tied to my visa status." There was a pause, but not the kind filled with doubt. It was the kind filled with recognition. "Please come in tomorrow morning," the assistant said. "Mr. Kovac specializes in cases like yours." That night, sleep didn't come. I lay awake, watching headlights from passing cars flicker across the ceiling, listening to my thoughts spiral. The idea of facing a lawyer terrified me almost as much as Caldwell had. What if I didn't have enough evidence? What if the recordings weren't as clear as I thought? What if I sounded hysterical? What if this ruined me? When dawn arrived, I was already dressed, my folder of evidence clutched tightly in my hands. I took the subway downtown, rehearsing my story silently. By the time I entered the law firm, an office with tall windows and shelves stacked with thick legal books, I felt like I might collapse from nerves. A man in his 40s stepped out of a conference room. He had tired eyes, the kind of eyes that had seen too much but kept going anyway. "Alina?" he asked. "Yes," I whispered. "Come in." His office was warm, cluttered, very human, not the cold, intimidating space I expected. I sat, hands trembling slightly as I placed my folder on the table. "Tell me everything," he said. And I did. Every detail, every threat, every recording, every sickening moment I'd kept hidden. I watched his expression shift gradually, from focused attention to anger to disbelief, then finally to a calm, razor-sharp seriousness. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "You did everything right," he said firmly. "Absolutely everything. You gathered legal evidence, you followed procedure, and most importantly, you reported it." My breath quivered. "Do I have a case?" "You don't just have a case," he said. "You have a strong one. What he did wasn't subtle. It was coercion, visa-based extortion, sexual misconduct, abuse of authority." He tapped the edge of my folder. "This is textbook illegal." I didn't realize tears were filling my eyes until one fell onto my hand. "What happens now?" I asked, voice cracking. "Now," he said gently, "we file a lawsuit. HR will do their internal investigation, but that won't be enough. People like Caldwell survive internal reviews all the time. Companies protect their own. But when you involve the law, everything changes." My stomach twisted. "Will the company retaliate?" "Legally, they can't," he said. "If they try, they will only strengthen your case." "But my visa." "You will not lose your visa," he said firmly. "In fact, once we file, there are protections specifically for immigrants facing workplace harassment. You'll be covered. I promise." It was the first time in weeks someone had told me I was safe. And for the first time, I almost believed it. We spent the next 2 hours going over details. I signed documents. He explained the process, slow, invasive, stressful. There would be interviews, statements, reviews, potential court hearings. Nothing about it would be easy, but I wouldn't be alone. When I left the law office, the sky was bright, too bright for the heaviness sitting inside me. I walked slowly, letting the city roar around me. I still felt the fear of losing everything, of facing Caldwell again, of the uncertain road ahead. But beneath the fear was something sturdier, a foundation forming, a spine stiffening. Back at the office, whispers had already begun. HR must have moved quickly. People watched me with thin curiosity, some with sympathy, some with confusion. No one asked directly, but I could feel the tension spreading like smoke. That afternoon, HR called Caldwell into a closed-door meeting. He went in confident, his chin high, his stride arrogant as always. But when he came out an hour later, his face was pale with fury. He saw me across the office. I didn't look away. He stared like a man realizing, not yet defeated, but finally challenged. A predator sensing the ground shifting beneath him. Later, I met with HR again and informed them I had retained legal counsel. Their expressions tightened, and I saw the exact moment they understood that this situation was no longer internal. It was bigger, public, dangerous for them and for him. That evening, as I walked home, my hands still trembled from the adrenaline of the day. Filing the lawsuit wasn't just a step. It was a leap across a chasm I couldn't return from, but it was the right leap. This was the most terrifying moment of my life. But it was also the moment I realized something crucial. Weakness hadn't driven me to fight. Strength had. And I wasn't done yet. The day Caldwell fell didn't arrive with drama. It arrived quietly, like a shift in the weather that you only recognize once you're already soaked by the rain. I came into the office early as usual, expecting nothing more than another tense day of waiting. But the atmosphere was wrong. Too still. Too heavy. The kind of heavy that tells you people know something, even if no one has said a word yet. The first sign was the look Ethan gave me when I walked in. Not curiosity, not pity. Something else. A warning, maybe. Or maybe just confirmation that the storm had finally reached ground level. "Morning," he said, but his eyes flicked toward Caldwell's office. The blinds were closed. They were never closed this early. Around 10, the elevator dinged and 2 men in suits stepped out. Men I'd never seen before, official-looking, carrying folders and emotionless expressions. They went straight to HR. Half the floor stopped typing for a moment, pretending not to stare. My pulse quickened. This was it. The investigation wasn't just a whisper anymore. It had weight, bodies, consequences. Minutes later, HR escorted Caldwell down the hallway. He wasn't handcuffed, wasn't shouting, but he wasn't the man I'd seen strutting around the office for months either. His jaw was clenched so tightly the muscles twitched. His tie was slightly crooked, as if he'd adjusted it too aggressively. His face, usually carrying that smug confidence, looked drained of color. He didn't look at me. Not at first. But as he passed my desk, his gaze snapped toward me like a snake reacting to a sudden movement. Fury flared in his eyes, pure, cold, unfiltered hatred. A look that said, "You ruined me." A look that wished it could tear me apart. My stomach flipped. My hands shook under the desk. But outwardly, I stayed still, meeting his stare without flinching. For the first time, he looked small. For the first time, he looked scared. HR guided him to a side conference room. The door closed. The glass walls muted the voices, but not enough to hide the tension. People pretended to work, but no one was truly working. Screens were on, keyboards clicked sporadically, but attention hovered over that room like a storm cloud. My chest tightened with every passing second. He wouldn't go down quietly. Men like him never did. After nearly an hour, the door finally opened. Caldwell stepped out, face stiff, lips pressed so hard they nearly disappeared. He looked at the floor, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. HR followed behind him, Marissa included, her expression unreadable. Then came the announcement. The head of HR walked to the center of the office floor and cleared her throat. "Attention, everyone. Effective immediately, Mr. Caldwell has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of an internal and external investigation." A shockwave moved through the room. Gasps, whispered exchanges, disbelief, recognition, pieces clicking together. This wasn't just an internal scandal anymore. The phrase external investigation hung in the air like thunder. Caldwell turned toward the elevator. Before stepping inside, he looked back, this time directly at me. No masks, no pretenses. His eyes burned, and then the elevator doors slid shut. When he disappeared, it felt as if the entire office exhaled for the first time in years. The tension in the room didn't vanish, but it loosened. Coworkers exchanged glances, some shocked, some relieved, some whispering things like "finally" and "it was a matter of time." Whispers grew into murmurs, murmurs into quiet conversations. Stories began bubbling up, half-finished sentences about something similar happening before, the intern he fixated on, that woman who left suddenly, how management always swept things under the rug. People weren't talking about me, not yet. They were talking about him. And God, there was so much to talk about. Around lunch, Mira approached my desk. She didn't say anything at first. She just touched my arm gently. Her eyes were shining with something like relief mixed with sorrow. "You did it," she whispered. "I didn't do it alone," I replied softly. She nodded, understanding the weight of those words. "No, but you were the one who finally said something." I wasn't sure whether to feel proud or terrified. Both emotions churned inside me like two animals fighting for space. Later, HR called me in again, not for questioning, but for reassurance. They told me the company was cooperating fully with investigators, that I would be protected, that this matter was being taken with utmost seriousness. Their voices were calm, professional, but I saw the fear in their eyes too. Caldwell had been with the company for decades. His downfall would stain the firm's reputation, and I was the catalyst. When I returned to my desk, I found Ethan waiting there. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "If you need someone to walk you home tonight, I can." The kindness hit me harder than I expected, but I shook my head. "No, I'm okay." And strangely, I was. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like prey. I didn't feel cornered. I didn't feel hunted. I felt free. Not completely. Not yet. The lawsuit was still ongoing. My future was still uncertain. My visa still fragile. But for the first time, the threat was no longer breathing down my neck. As I packed my things to leave, I walked past the conference room where Caldwell had been confronted. The lights were off now, the room empty, the glass walls still slightly fogged from bodies pressed around the table in heated discussion, a ghost of a battlefield. Outside, the city hummed with evening noise, cars honking, people shouting, lights flashing. I stepped onto the sidewalk and breathed in cold air that felt sharper, cleaner. He was gone. Not defeated yet, not fully, but removed, exposed, falling. I looked up at the skyscrapers reflecting the fading sunset. For the first time since coming to New York, I felt tall enough to stand among them. And I knew. This wasn't just his fall. It was my rise. The morning I learned the case was officially decided, I was on my way to work, half asleep, half anxious, clutching a too-hot coffee that burned my fingers every few steps. My phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I considered ignoring it until a voicemail popped up from my attorney. "Alina, call me back. It's good news." For a second, the world blurred. The noise of Manhattan, horns, shouting, footsteps, sirens, faded into a low hum. I stepped into a small recess between buildings, shielding myself from the wind, and called him back with trembling fingers. He answered on the first ring. "It's done," he said. The settlement is finalized." My breath caught. "The company has agreed to every one of our terms," he continued. "Caldwell has been terminated permanently. The complaint goes on his record. They're also issuing an apology statement, internal and external." I closed my eyes, leaning against the cold concrete. "And your contract," he added, softer now, "will be renewed independently of management oversight. They've committed to sponsoring your visa without conditions." For a moment, everything inside me went silent, still, weightless. Then emotion crashed into me so intensely, I had to steady myself with one hand. "It's over?" I whispered. "It's over," he said. "You won." I didn't cry. Not then. The moment was too overwhelming, too unreal. I whispered my thanks, ended the call, and stood there with my coffee cooling rapidly between my hands as the city surged around me. I felt small and enormous all at once. The last few months had felt like drowning with my eyes open, fighting invisible currents, swallowing fear, forcing myself to resurface again and again. And now it felt like breathing for the first time. When I finally walked into the office, a strange quiet settled over the floor. People looked at me with something new in their expressions. Not curiosity, not pity, but respect. Real respect. The kind that sits heavy, that acknowledges something significant has happened. Mira approached first, gripping her mug with both hands. "Is it true?" she whispered. "About the outcome?" I nodded. Her shoulders sagged in relief, and she pulled me into a quick, fierce hug. "I'm so proud of you," she said, "and so grateful. You did what none of us dared." I didn't feel like a hero. I still felt tired. But there was a warmth in her voice that settled something deep in me. Throughout the day, quiet congratulations drifted my way, subtle, careful, but sincere. Even people I barely knew nodded at me in the hallway, as if silently acknowledging that something unjust had finally been corrected. HR called me in for a final meeting. They looked humbled, almost fragile. The head of HR folded her hands and said, "We want to assure you that this will not happen again. To anyone." I didn't bother to ask how they planned to ensure it. Not out of distrust, but because their promises didn't matter to me as much anymore. I had learned something life-changing. I could protect myself. As the sun began to set, the office bathed in golden light. I stood by the window, a place I rarely allowed myself to linger before, and looked out over Manhattan. I remembered the first night I'd arrived. The chaos, the blinding lights, the feeling that the city was daring me to survive it. I had survived. More than that, I had carved a space for myself here, a space no one could take from me. Caldwell was gone, my visa secure, my career intact, my dignity reclaimed. But the victory didn't feel explosive or triumphant. It felt quiet, steady, solid, like a foundation finally settling into place after a long, violent storm. Hours later, as the office emptied, I stayed behind, letting the moment breathe. The city outside was a glittering ocean of windows and neon, stretching endlessly in every direction. This view had once intimidated me. It had made me feel like a temporary visitor, a foreign name on a company badge, someone whose future could be snapped in half with a single threat. Now, it felt different. Now, Manhattan looked like possibility, like a life I had fought for and won. I pressed my hand gently against the window glass. It vibrated faintly with the pulse of the city. "This is mine," I whispered. "Not the city itself. No one owns New York. But my place in it, my path, my future." Behind me, the office lights dimmed automatically, one row at a time, until only the glow from the city remained. I stood there for a long time, breathing slowly, fully, deeply. For the first time since arriving in this country, I wasn't scared of what tomorrow might hold. I wasn't a newcomer anymore. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't a woman running from someone's control. I was Alina, and I had built my future on my own terms. When I finally left the office that night, stepping into the crisp night air of Manhattan, the city didn't feel like it was daring me anymore. It felt like it was welcoming me home.